Hey, welcome back to the Hot Mic International and Invitational. On top of that, welcome back, everybody. We're ready for our lower finals here between Abrakeydabra and Method NA. And a surprise turnaround of the top 3 teams from last season, showing their consistency here, Tuttles.
Yeah, it's definitely no surprise, I think, to anybody here to see Abrakeydabra, Method EU, and Method NA securing up those top 3 spots. It'll definitely be interesting to see how Abrakeydabra does against Method NA. I know a lot of the time we actually did end up seeing this where Abrakeydabra would actually be in the upper bracket finals, but then would lose to Method NA in the lower bracket finals. So we're definitely going to see what ends up happening in these dungeons today.
Right, you are, Tuttles. We're starting off with Atal'Dazar, then Motherlode, and Underrot. So, Sanguine Explosive on this one, Nagura. This was a pretty special dungeon as well, because this was the opportunity for everybody to place their votes on what 2 affixes they wanted to see. So, going to be very exciting how these teams start dealing with it. And the poll results, in favor of Abra. The Europeans are still up late at night and ready for action, and so are we. So let's take it into game 1 here at Atal'Dazar.
Yeah, Twitch chat has been very mean to those MDI groups choosing Sanguine and Explosive for Atal'Dazar.
Oh, I like it.
But those teams have been doing pretty well. Both Abra and Method NA actually played Atal'Dazar already yesterday. Method NA did have 15 minutes 12, while Abra had 16:05. So Method did have the better time in this dungeon, but Abra, of course, did have time to improve their strategy, so maybe they changed something up.
Yeah, both teams here are starting off with very similar pulls. You actually do see both healers standing on top of those ledges in order for those juggernauts to end up dashing out. A very common strategy that we actually have been seeing from a lot of teams coming into this Atal'Dazar is going left towards Priestess Alunza very early on. You end up like shadow melding, and you just end up stealthing all the way towards Priestess Alunza once you do end up getting this 9-pack of mobs down as quickly as possible. You need to make sure that you end up kicking the wildfires and all of the casts from those augurs, otherwise you will end up taking a sizable amount of damage and potentially wiping. You actually do see both groups trying to kite it out of Sanguine. Is that a mob mass entangled in the Sanguine? What?
Okay, JB definitely forgot to switch to Typhoon. 100% this was a mistake. JB just wanted to Typhoon them out of Sanguine, but he still has Mass Root selected from a previous dungeon.
From the Siege of Borealis.
Yes, so he just Mass Rooted the mobs in the Sanguine. So this is a huge mistake by JB, forgetting to change the talents. You know how it is sometimes. Mass Root, you barely ever use that talent. You most of the time go with Typhoon. So if you switch it for one dungeon, it definitely happens that you just forget to switch it back. But JB definitely needs some sort of weak aura if you're not in a dungeon to remind him to change this, because this already happened to JB one time, I believe, in the spring season. So this is definitely something you need to keep an eye on for the rest of the dungeon. They will not have this Typhoon available, which is very crucial for something like Sanguine, right? Yeah,
making sure that all the mobs get knocked out of the Sanguine using Ring of Peace or Typhoon or any other ability is super important, just because if the mobs do get stuck in the Sanguine, they'll end up healing for 5% per second whenever they are inside of that Sanguine. You actually do see both teams doing very similar strategies where they're ending up pulling a lot of the trash with Priestess Alunza, and then they are actually kind of cleaving down those golden ads that we actually do see. I know a lot of times you'll end up having like roots or paralysis or blind or something like that for those ads, but we have seen a lot of teams recently just cleaving down like the first ad and then using paralysis on the second Spirit of Gold, like you can actually see on Abrakeydabra screen right now.
Yeah, and both of the teams, of course, also using their bloodlust. That's one of the advantages of going this side of the area first, going left up all the way to Priestess, just so we can get a very efficient bloodlust timing and usage on this trash, because we also see a very nice pull here on Abrakeydabra side, which is something that Method EU also did yesterday, but they did fail as Gingy grappling hooked into the fire gauntlet. So that's something that Abrakeydabra saw from Method EU probably, and are doing the same right now, this time without them dying to the fire. So very well done by Abrakeydabra getting this extra percentage, and it looks like Shakib is doing the very same on Method NA side right now.
Yeah, and in addition to that, like you were saying about Bloodlust too, with this dungeon being about a 15-ish minute dungeon, you're only going to be getting 2 uses of Bloodlust. So actually making sure that you're able to get a very strong first use of that Bloodlust is very important. I know last season we actually saw a lot of groups just electing to use Bloodlust on like that 9-pack of trash at the very beginning, which while it's like an okay Bloodlust is not exactly what you're going to be looking for. So teams innovating this season and going to Priestess Alunza. I know that Shakib ended up doing this weird strategy similar to what you actually see from Abrakeydabra here, where they're actually just jumping away. I know Shakib ended up like snapping like a 9-pack of Sarids to their tank from Method NA's run yesterday, so it'll be interesting to see what Abrakeydabra is doing here though.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra definitely ahead at this point, as they're already doing the snapping pull, as you talked about, with those swords. You see all of them just jumping to this ledge now. The one thing that is really annoying here with the snapping strategy is the Sanguine, of course. The swords have a lot less HP than the Sky Screamers, so you want to make sure you move them earlier, and that's exactly what Divine Field did. So very well done by Divine Field, not getting the Sanguine heal, at least not too much of the healing off on the Sky Streamers. So they did not heal to 100%, because there's so many pulls on the floor. If only one tick goes off on the Sky Screamers, they will be full healed immediately.
Yep, and so similar pull coming out for Method NA. Again, we gotta point out the fact that JB has forgotten to take Typhoon and is instead using Mass Entangle, because this actually could have gone very poorly for Method NA. Fortunately enough, they actually do get all the Sards killed very quickly, and they actually get that Sky Screamer out of that snap spot with actually incredible precision there, making sure that none of the mobs actually end up healing. You actually do see Dr. J jumping down for the side of Abrakeydabra. He looks like he's distracting Razan in place. You see Divine here with the Dynamancer and those two dinosaurs jumping down as well, just trying to make sure that they pull Razan, and they're pulling it close to where you can actually end up pulling those two pterodactyls that end up doing their fear. So the most important dinosaur that you actually end up wanting to kill is that orange one, because it does end up doing that charge and then the stun. The Dynamancer too can also be kind of dangerous, but it's only dangerous really for your tank.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Abrakeydabra improved their time, because if I remember last time Abrakeydabra was playing this dungeon, when they jumped down to Razan at this point, the boss was further into the room, because of course he patrols into around the room. So they definitely are faster this time than they were yesterday. Method NA, they also jumped down, but they still have not engaged the boss at this point. Maybe they didn't get the distract off, because if the boss is in a bad position, you have to wait until he walked all the way around, which is cost you a lot of time. So maybe they didn't get the distract off because they had some trouble earlier with the trash.
I actually think it comes down to that the slowness on the first pull. And actually, yeah, you do see Nerf end up going down here, but I think the pat on Razan ends up actually coming down to the slowness on that first pack with rooting those mobs inside of that Sanguine. You actually do see some of the mobs from Method NA healing the Sanguine, but it's not going to be too bad. Abrakeydabra here also dropping super low from that Wild Thrash from that one dinosaur, making sure that you end up actually not being in range of it, plus the Frenzy Charge coming out and stunning one of the people as well. It looks like that dinosaur actually ended up dying underneath Razan, and Razan's actually going to be gaining health here for Abrakeydabra. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the boss actually does get moved out of that Sanguine, but that was not great. That was a pretty big blunder from Abrakeydabra there.
Especially in Tyrannical, you do not want to see the boss healing. Both of the teams making mistakes on this pull where they have the trash on top of the boss. We see a fear also going through on Method NA's side. Thankfully, nothing really happened with the fear going out, but JB also proccing the staff, as you can see. The debuff on the group frames up there, and Yoda not having the cheat death available. So you definitely want to be careful at this point, just because, you know, this Sanguine just means so much. You can see how long both of those teams need to get Razan down, just because in a tyrannical setting, Razan has so much HP. And this is so scary with all those Sanguine pools around the boss, as you can see for both of those teams.
Yeah, Razan actually also does a pretty sizable amount of damage to your tank. They actually buffed the Serrated Teeth dot, which is that physical dot that they end up that Razan ends up putting on your tank. You actually do see Abrakeydabra having a really good Ring of Peace to make sure that that pterodactyl, that Sky Screamer, does not end up dying beneath Razan. And then you actually see Method NA here pulling in the Emissary of the Tides, getting a leg sweep out on it. Emissary of the Tides is not super dangerous most of the time with bosses, because there's like really no protected casts that you normally need to kick and stuff like that. So most of the time you're in good shape, just as long as Nerf is comfortable with tanking Razan plus that Tides together.
Yeah, you see, Method NA are catching up, of course, on the boss DPS, just because of this Sanguine on Abrakeydabра's side. There's still a difference in percentage when you look at the trash percentage, 75% for Abra, while Method NA is slightly behind on that 69%. Abra also pulled the Emissary off the Tides here on top of the boss, making sure they just get a little bit extra percentage, while, you know, they have to fight the boss anyway. So very efficient pull off the Emissary of Tides here. And again, Method NA catching up. They're on the same percentage, so this is very close between those two teams.
Yep, and you actually having rogues whenever you were actually able to have some of these reanimated guardians or festering Sky Screamers or Emissary of the Tides or whatever else you have on Razan also makes your rogues end up do more damage because of keep your wits about you. The trait ends up allowing the rogues to convert some of this AoE to single target damage, so that's very strong for them. Abrakeydabra and Method NA really neck and neck here just because of that Sanguine end up healing the boss. In addition to that, the Sanguine ended up forcing Razan to be further positioned off to the side so that the melee uptime was actually significantly reduced too. So it's just like a bunch of just like minor errors from Abrakeydabra that's going to cost them some of the time and allows Method NA to kind of get back into it. So we're actually seeing similar pulls here coming in from both groups.
Yeah, there's actually a mirror pull coming out from Abra and Method NA. The only difference is that they chose a different side of the pillar. So everything else, the exact same thing. You can also see the root on the tides here, but this Sky Screamer got stunned in the Sanguine pull, so it healed to full HP, and you need to wait until the stun disappears for the Sky Screamer to come out. Definitely not a very good stun, whoever was that. Maybe they were out of interrupts too, and they had to use the stun, and another shot coming out from one of the rogues here. Again, maybe they're running out of interrupts, having to use the stuns, which is of course not optimal at all if you have those Sanguine pulls on the floor.
Okay, so rogues have rotational stuns with Between the Eyes, so they end up having to use it for damage, but rogues using Between the Eyes there to stun your Sky Screamer inside of Sanguine, that is just like not what you're looking to do.
Worth it.
I mean, I think it ends up happening a lot for most groups, but at the end of the day, for very practiced groups, you should know that you have to hold your Between the Eyes, that you can't be using it right there. Both Method NA and Abrakeydabra here doing a good job on this trash pack, keeping that Enchanted Emissary away. Otherwise, it would be reflecting group damage to the whole entire group. Of course, if that actually ends up getting too close to rogues, they may end up accidentally clipping it with their Blade Flurry just because of their increased range and just like instantly dying. I know that we've actually seen clips of that before, but right now Abrakeydabra and Method NA are actually pretty close, with Abrakeydabra being slightly ahead right now though.
I mean, we have to talk about this Typhoon again by JB, unfortunately, because even though the rogues are making the mistakes, of course it's not JB's fault, right? They are stunning them in the Sanguine, so it's the rogue's fault. But JB could be saving, they could recover from those rogue mistakes because it's melee brain after all, right?
Yeah.
The healer could save them with the Typhoon, but he just does not have it available to him because he still has his mastery from the dungeon earlier. So definitely a huge mistake by not switching this talent. As Abrakeydabra, they're pretty far ahead at this point. They're about to get rid of those totems here and get into locale space too, while Method NA just engage the boss.
Yeah, this is unfortunately is going to be a game of seconds. Abrakeydabra is actually at 100%, while Method NA unfortunately still at 96%. So there's still a little bit more trash that Method NA has to do after Volcall ends up going down before they will end up completing the dungeon. Plus, they do have Yasma from both sides as well. So it would actually take a mistake, I think, from Abrakeydabra here for them to be able to lose it. Like losing a death, a couple deaths on Yasma could be one of those things, or maybe like a full group wipe. But right now, Abrakeydabra is firmly in the driver's seat for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, it happened to them yesterday. Abrakeydabra had 2 spider deaths on the way up to Yasma and on Yasma herself. So if that happens again, they can definitely still lose because this is still close, right? Method NA just having a little bit more single target damage because that's all that matters from now on. You only have Volcall left, and then you have Yasma left. So the more damage you do, the faster you kill the boss, obviously. That's how it works, I heard. Quick math. But Method NA not that far behind.
Yeah, but both of these teams are actually playing pretty well for what it's worth. This is just like it's going to end up being a match of mere seconds, and that's why we end up having to scrutinize some of the stuff like the Typhoon, or we have to scrutinize some of the stuff like healing the Between the Eyes stun inside of the Sanguine. Whenever you are playing a team of Abracadabra's caliber as Method NA, these few seconds end up mattering, and it's the exact same. And it's going to end up determining like the differentiation between first, second, and third between all of these Titans of West Cup that we have been seeing week in and week out coming in here.
Yeah, most definitely. Especially because, I mean, if you look at the timer, right, Method NA 15:12 is the time they had yesterday when they played this dungeon. And Abra were 1 minute behind on 16:05. Now the thing is though, Method NA, when they played Atal, they were actually playing against Method U, and they lost with their 15:12 timing. Well, Abra won with their 16:05 timing, right? So the seeding definitely matters. Abra getting that first place in time trials just meant that they had an easier way, and even though they were playing a little bit worse, they had worse times in most of the dungeons, they still got up ahead compared to Method NA.
I think Abrakeydabra has also innovated a little bit of their strategy from some of the stuff that they actually saw from Method NA yesterday. Just how you end up snapping like that 4-pack together is actually very smart from what we actually did end up seeing from Method NA yesterday. While it also could be very dangerous, Abrakeydabra just has time to practice that kind of thing with like you said, just a little bit different routing here. Abrakeydabra here waiting for the RP to proc for the stairs to be able to activate for them to be able to make their way up to Yasma. Hopefully not dying to the spiders that are on the stairs like we saw yesterday, but overall, this is still neck and neck here. Method NA sitting at 96%, Abrakeydabra, of course, at 100% trash count as well, and This is going to be a race to the finish, guys.
Did you see Swag just jumping down off the stairs there? I don't know what happened, but he just wanted to go up the stairs one more time. As you see the Bloodlust being popped by Abra here, and Method not pulling the boss much slower behind Abra, to be honest, at this point. At this point, if you get a couple of 5 buffs on Method and you don't get any on Abra, then it could still be Method that pulls it off here. Even though they do have 1 death, you have to consider the 5 seconds difference, and they also need the 4% trash, but they probably pulled a Sky Screamer, I assume, or something like that to see it in the back. I'm not really sure what Method strategy. Oh yeah, they have the Sky Screamer there in the back.
Oh my goodness, there's an explosive go off. Oh, the fear went off on the whole entire group. You actually might end up seeing some people going down because they end up fear pathing into the spiders. Lighty actually ends up being able to get out of that incredibly quickly too. The explosive plus these 2 Sky Screamers is actually very scary just because of how you actually have to kick the Sky Screamers. So most of the time you're actually not going to be in melee range of Yasma, especially whenever you're dropping that Soul Rend off of them. So this is actually a very incredibly dangerous pull coming in from Method because not even the tank will be in melee sometimes. Plus, you also do have the cast from Yasma that you have to end up kicking as well. So this is definitely a very dangerous play for Method but if they're actually able to pull it off, then they're in a pretty good spot. But unfortunately, Abrakeydabra is just a little bit further ahead just because of how they ended up dealing with their Sanguine and just how the pulls were just slightly more cleaner. And in this game of seconds, you can't afford to have like minor Sanguine mistakes, especially against teams like Abrakeydabra whenever you are Method here.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, you know, they only have 1 death, so it's not a huge deal if you look at the death because it was Nerf tank going down, so they got the rest up immediately. They didn't lose much time because of it at all. But because they had those small things, with, you know, not having the Typhoon, stunning the mobs in the Sanguine and so on, those are very precious seconds that you lose that matter in the end, as we can see right now. I mean, the difference in the boss HP is not a lot. Of course, it is tyrannical, so it's a little bit more than it would be on 45, but still, if they wouldn't have made those small mistakes, they definitely had a much better shot. So Method needs to get their head into the game if they want to win against Abra, because they are playing so clean and so well on Abra's side.
Yeah, this is a very good showing from Abrakeydabra. This is the team that the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde analogy that Sloot constantly brings up. Abrakeydabra is either this team that really puts the pedal to the metal and will make teams actually have to work to make sure that they end up securing victories, or at the end of the day, they're just going to throw the game away. And Abrakeydabra here really showing why they are one of the top 3 teams in NA.
And they're stepping up and showing it throughout this team as they have been that #1 seed going throughout this one. So very cool to start seeing Abra really showing their stripes and picking up on any of those little mistakes that Method NA has had, because thus far Method NA has had a very solid performance, but it's not to the quite at the level that we're really expecting out of this one's ironic.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this entire dungeon, it was just kind of sanguine errors on both teams. The most egregious of here being this Massin Tangle on the first pack, and I heard you guys talking about it. That's clearly a mistake, right? I mean, you have to be going Typhoon, especially in a sanguine dungeon. Other than that, I mean, Abrakeydabra also had sanguine issues. They even had to take a sanguine on Rezon as well. I mean, this was just kind of who made the least of these egregious mistakes, and fortunately Abra only really had this 1 tick of sanguine on Rezon. Method had some other healing issues as well later in the dungeon. So neither team particularly looked too impressive here to me. They both could have been a lot more clean, but fortunately for Abra, they ended up making fewer mistakes in this dungeon.
They definitely did make a fewer mistakes and no deaths that are hampering them down. So when both teams are playing that close together, that extra 5 seconds really does start making a difference.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, especially with the death, when it's a tank death, you also have to have problems with aggro as well. Like whenever the tank dies, you have to make sure your rogues are riposting, make sure you're kind of committing defensive cooldowns at that point, which is not what you want to be doing. You want to be saving them for some other, important point later on in the dungeon. It's just not good in general.
It's just not good. But you know what is very good? Method Dungeon tools. So let's start digging in a little bit. It's ironic on some of our routing here.
Yeah, I want to highlight this poll again yesterday with the MDT route because it's kind of something interesting to go through. This is a route and kind of a strategy that we don't see from most teams. We have 4 players taking the normal route through this dungeon where they're kind of pulling both these 2 packs and then tricksing them to the tank here, and he's kind of going to be standing on this ledge right in here. Freehand? Yeah, right on this ledge right here. But because you can't really hit these mobs until they're stacked up on that edge, they have 1 rogue run off to the side here and actually end up pulling this pack with tricks on the tank as well. So they end up going into that same spot. Everything stacked up. This is a perfect pull. And honestly, if I'm another team that's not Method NA, I want to see them do this again. And we can see them do this with this clip here. Go ahead.
Ooh, even getting the visual.
Yeah, we've got 2 clips. So we have the first clip here showing what the rest of the team is doing. They're all stealthed up here, and they get the double tricks on both of these packs instantly. And then also, we can also see from the other side, Shakib pulling the final pack as well. I mean, this is just kind of one of those pulls that we see. I remember we saw it with Waycrest Manor and Team D last year, where, a team debuted a poll and everyone's like, okay, we're just going to go ahead and steal that. I expect to see almost every single team doing this next week.
It's very cool to start seeing the journey that Shakib goes on. Just something that you're not really expecting. Like, oh yeah, of course it makes sense at this point to be able to grab as many mobs as possible when they're kind of circumventing the usual route, the route that's commonly traveled, and going off to the side, stealthing past other mobs they don't even need to worry about. That's something that's really cool to see, and especially having more innovation in terms of our own routing as well. So we're gonna take a quick break before we get into the next game. Don't go anywhere, guys. At Method NA versus Abrakeydabra, Game 2, right on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we're in our lower finals with Abrakeydabra up 1 against Method NA. Previously, they've had some struggles in their second and third games thus far, so that they're going to need to make sure they buckle down the hatches as we're getting ourselves ready to go into the Motherlode.
Yeah, so Abra was playing this dungeon yesterday already, and they had big struggles. They had 12 deaths, they lost to Pain for Fam, they didn't even finish the dungeon. So we will have to see if Abra can recover from yesterday's play. I mean, they must be on a high right now because they won their first game, so they have the momentum. Maybe they can just pull this off here, but Method NA, again, they had better times in almost all of the dungeons so far. So Method NA still has a very good shot at getting a reverse sweep here against Abra.
I think Abra against Paint for Femme yesterday ended up having a bunch of issues towards the very beginning of the instance, like with like tank deaths and then just like having like almost 2 full team wipes, where right here we actually see a huge pull coming in from Abrakeydabra here, whereas Method NA doing something similar with just a little bit smaller size. Abrakeydabra here, it looks like they have like 4 Peacekeepers? It's either 3 or 4 Peacekeepers with them, making sure that they also continue to kill those explosives off. Otherwise, if they end up going off, that would actually be very dangerous for the whole entire group. Outlaw Rogue, of course, one of the best classes at killing explosives, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue here for them. You actually saw that Thug. It looked like it was actually sapped off to the side, so that was actually very smart from Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, I think, okay, so Method NA actually having some trouble here. Yoda went down to keep dropping very low. Now the problem is if you have 1 damage dealer dying, all of a sudden everything crumbles because you need those interrupts, right? You need the interrupts for the assassins, for the thugs. You see Shakib actually proccing his cheat death as well. These are very, very dangerous pulls, especially because of the thugs with their random charges around. We see Abrakeydabra actually had those wipes because of the thug charges onto Smock. Smock had double charge on him. He went down with an explosive going off, and then Divine Field died because of it, and that's why their whole wipe happened. So they gotta be careful to not pull too many of the thugs, and they also gotta be careful to make sure they interrupt or soothe off the enrage effect from them.
Do you actually think it would have been worth them to use their battle res on Yoda there whenever he ended up going down? He looked like he elected to just release and run back, but with the battle res available, do you think it would have been a better decision, or do you think like running back is a little bit better for them? I
think it's super scary to not have all of your damage dealers available because of the control that you need on these kind of pulls. So I think Yoda just immediately released without even like thinking about it. But it worked out for them to not use it because he's back and nothing really happened. But it definitely could have been a group wipe just because, you know, they didn't get him back up. They didn't have the rogue interrupts. But it worked out for them here. So they saved the battle res, good on them. And Abrakeydabra is pulling ahead though. They're on 28% trash, while Method NA still dealing with this trash back on 19%.
Does Method NA have 5 thugs in that pack?
There's a lot of them.
They're literally they're running around with so many of these thugs. Basically, if they group charge you all at once, you can just instantly die, especially in this fortified setting. Or you get stunned into like a volcano or some ground effect as well. You can just like instantly pop from these thugs if they all end up charging you and stunning you at once. So this is actually a very scary pull for Method NA, where it doesn't feel like it should end up giving you too much of an advantage to be pulling this many thugs at once. Abrakeydabra, of course, is a significant amount ahead in terms of trash count, though.
Yeah, this looks very scary. You saw 1 charge go on JB, and then the other charge go on Lighty. If this charge that went on Lighty would have went on JB as well, then he would have died, 100% sure. So this is like an RNG super risky pull that Method NA just did. They are lucky that it's paying off because, again, if you have bad RNG, the same person get hit a couple of times in a row, you're just dead. There's nothing you can do about it because those charges cannot be avoided. You see Lighty actually getting dropping very low here as well. One thing that we didn't note yet is that Abrakeydabra playing a triple rogue, while Method NA is actually playing the Windwalker here.
Yeah, and one of the major benefits for the Windwalker is actually that Ring of Peace with how you're actually able to get some of these mechanized Peacekeepers piloted. So most of the time you end up needing like a knockback or like a Ring of Peace or like a DK grip in order to be able to get some of these Peacekeepers to activate from the mech jockeys, because the mech jockey will end up running to the Peacekeeper robot that's closest closest to it. And to make sure that the mech jockey is in an appropriate position for it to be appropriately piloted, you do need a knockback occasionally. Most of the time, Typhoon is really bad choice for it, but you can do it if you actually end up sapping the mob and then use Typhoon in order to be able to knock it back. But of course, that's very dangerous, especially compared to something like a Ring of Peace coming in from Lighty here for Method in A.
We see it's not actually proccing this staff. You can see the debuff on the group frame, so not available for 10 minutes for Smok, while GB did not proc it yet. You see Abra actually using Stealth and Shroud to go past some of those mobs. You see a lot of CC coming out here. If you look at the back, there's some saps coming out on some of those, on the vendors, to not have too many interrupts going on. Another vendor here sapped as well. You see Lighty going down on Method and A side. They're not committing their battle rest so far. They would probably just want to finish it off and get a normal rest out.
Yeah, with just a few seconds left, they may... I wonder if JB is like better off just kind of shadow melding and then trying to single target res in there, or if he's actually going to end up saving that shadow meld for something off later. Because of course JB could have actually dropped combat with that and then just elected to just like normal res Lighty with just like a normal single target res. But it looks like Method in A is kind of positioning in order to be able to get a nice pull, and you actually do see JB there knocking that whole entire pack, and you can actually see that mech jockey running off screen, jumping inside of that Peacekeeper. You actually have to make sure that you tag the mech jockey to where you can actually get double count from the Peacekeeper and the mech jockey that are inside of it. But Method in A here with a pretty good pull there, but Abrakeydabra seems like they're just like so far ahead here, just making sure that they end up chain pulling, whereas Method in A is kind of just taking a little bit more time in between pulls here.
Yeah, it seemed like yesterday Method and A had a really fast strategy, as they only needed 18 minutes and 26 seconds. They had 0 deaths as well throughout the whole dungeon, so Method and A definitely struggling a little bit more today than they did yesterday, with already having 2 deaths on their board, while Abra having a clean run again, having 0 deaths, 71% for Abra now, and they still have some Peacekeepers to go. Now, we talked about the trash-heavy dungeon Motherlode already like a million times, but you just gotta understand that the trash after the first boss is so difficult to deal with that most of those teams just choose to do most of their trash before the first boss even.
Yeah, so we saw Method in A's 4 or 5 thug pull, and not to be outmatched, they have now activated 4 of these Peacekeepers all at once, making sure that nobody's standing near Nerf, otherwise they're going to end up getting killed by the front, the charged claw that will end up actually meleeing Nerf whenever the Peacekeeper does end up hitting him, whenever that is active on it. You actually do see 2 of those Peacekeepers finally going down. Abrakeydabra has actually pulled point-operated Crowd Pummeler and has some of the trash in the boss with it.
Yeah, so they pulled the pack in front of this boss with the boss, so this seems very dangerous, as you have an assassin to deal with. You also have the Peacekeeper who just keeps dropping those Historian pools on the floor, as you can see right now. So gotta move constantly. You also have the explosive spawn that you need to deal with at the same time, but they seem to be dealing with it pretty well so far. Now Method and A, I gotta question the huge pulls that Method and A is doing, because it seems like Method and A is basically doing bigger pulls and more riskier pulls than Abra, but because it takes them so much, defensives and whatnot to deal with all of those kind of casts and defucks and all of those interrupts at the same time, it seems like they're just slower because of that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think just the setup required for setting up all of these pulls that are for Method in A, while they are flashy and like cool to see, you have to wonder if just like not just like chain pulling like we saw from Abrakeydabra is going to just be a little bit more time efficient. Abrakeydabra, of course, does have this Peacekeeper here with coin-operated Crowd Pummeler, which can actually be kind of scary for your melee DPS, but fortunately enough, rogues do have cheat death available to them, so if they were to make a minor blunder in terms of their positioning, they would actually most of the time end up being okay. Method in A here looks like they're actually pulling some trash that you would otherwise get after coin-operated Crowd Pummeler. It looks like they're going to be looking to pull it into the boss here in just a couple seconds without Bloodlust available, so this can actually be very scary for Nerf.
Yeah, especially because they don't have any battle rests available. We see Shakib actually drop really low, having to use that cloak here to not die to that AoE knockback from the boss that leaves a dot behind damage over time effect. Now Method and A, I believe this is the same pull they did last time around, where they did pull those 9 reds on top. It didn't necessarily give them a super big advantage, but this time around, I mean, Abra seems like they improved their strategy so much from yesterday. I talked about this before, right? They had 12 deaths before they even managed to get to the first boss. Insane struggle last time around for Abra, and this time they cleaned it out. Perfect run here, 0 deaths, 81% trash already. And you can see this pull, we've seen teams struggle to this very pull a lot of times, where they had to kite backwards, because those sappers, if you miss one interrupt, this is crucial, as Dr. J procs his cheat death.
Yeah, and you actually do see JB here kicking those soccer balls into coin-operated crowd pummeler, whereas Abrakeydabra here running around, making their way towards Azarok here in just a couple seconds. This Sapper and Earthshaper pull can actually just be super dangerous for your tank, especially if you end up getting a bunch of those casts on him all at once. Fortunately enough, you can actually spell reflect some of those casts back at the mobs, doing a pretty sizable amount of damage to them. And you're actually going to see Abrakeydabra here looking to pop their Shroud and walk all the way up to Azarok, whereas Mythic Dungeon here is going to be killing coin-operated crowd pummeler in just a few more seconds.
Yeah, we've seen some of the teams actually pull the mini-boss here, Taskmaster, which we might see from Abra here as well. Okay, so they are going ahead and pulling this with some of the Shellbiters here as well to get the 100% trash before they go to the next boss. Now, this mini-boss is actually, it might not be too dangerous when it comes to damage, but it casts this cover, as you can see right now. And this cover basically reduces the damage taken by Ascari, damage taken by 70%, and also redirects all damage taken by friendly mobs around him. So once the cover is being cast, you want to drag the rest of the mobs away so they don't get affected by this redirect damage.
Yeah, and you can actually see like all the mobs that are afflicted by the cover. If you actually look and see those 3 like spinning blue shields that are around the mobs, that means that they are affected by the cover and they are entirely too close and that your tank needs to continue to kite them out. Most of the time we don't see teams on live pull Taskmaster very often. Most of the time mini bosses are pretty much skipped almost at all costs just because of how long they do end up taking, just for the percent that they do end up giving. But for a pull like that from Abrakeydabra with a bunch of the Shellbiters and the other mobs around Taskmaster Akari, it's actually pretty solid for them. They're going to be killing Taskmaster, and they're pretty much done for trash for the instance. They just have Azarok, Rixa, and then Mogul Razdunk here just for the left of them. So they have engaged Azarok. Mythic Dungeon also has engaged Azarok, both at the exact same time, but it's important to note that there's an 11% trash count difference. Both teams electing to use Bloodlust, making sure that you're running away from those Earth Ragers that do fixate onto you is also a very important part of this fight. You actually did see Divine end up popping his Fear to make sure that the Earth Ragers didn't end up doing their AoE damage that could have actually ended up wiping the group, but both teams here are in very similar spots.
Yeah, so one thing Mythic Dungeon could end up doing here, which was a very Mythic Dungeon strategy to do, was that they could pull the mini-boss on top of Azarok here, which is something that Mythic Dungeon invented, really. They were the first to show this on MDI in the spring cups. They were the ones who pulled Azarok and pulled it on top of the mini-boss here and just dealt with both of it at the very same time. Now, in the end, if you do that, you're going to lose boss damage, right? Because you will have to focus the trash a little bit, so they're still going to be a little bit slower if they end up doing that, but it is a very efficient way to deal with this trash here, and we can see it happening right now.
Yeah, and it also, and as always, the Earthshapers can actually be very dangerous for your tank, so Nerf needs to make sure that he does have that Spell Reflect available, maybe that Shield Wall available, whenever the Earthshapers end up casting into him. Taskmaster Akari and Azarok, of course, needs to be kited around the room whenever that cover is being cast. Something also interesting has been changed about Azarok recently. So basically, before, Azarok would only summon 1 Earth Rager at a time once you ended up killing the 4. It has now been changed to summon 2 at a time, so it does require a little bit more attention, especially from these triple melee comps that we've been seeing a lot in the MDI.
So Ladi actually going down here from Mythic Dungeon. They did have a battle rest, so he immediately got battle rest, but now they're out. So definitely going to be watching out now as Azarok is about to go down, though. They still have the Taskmaster to finish off and the rest of the trash as to get the 100%, while Abra already got the 100%. They're on their way to skip 2 Rixa Flux Flame here. They just have to use their Shadow Meld, making sure they have the proper skip, not have any deaths here, as they still have a very clean run. 0 deaths, 100% trash, only 2 bosses left for them, and obviously they're also going to be able to skip to the last boss with another Shadow Meld at the end after Rixa here.
Yeah, but these are by far the 2 most dangerous bosses. Rixa Flux Flame ends up putting that chemical burn on the 2 closest targets, so you can actually Spell Reflect them, cloak them, or just like use a pretty hefty personal against them, but overall they can actually be very dangerous, especially if they're on your tank while he's getting hit by Rixa. Additionally to that, making sure that you end up dropping all of that stuff on the ground and then using the Propellant Blast to kind of clear out the platform is a very important part of Rixa Flux Flame. And then of course Mogul Razdunk, we've actually seen some deaths from healers. It is the most important thing for Abrakeydabra here to make sure that they stay in the lead, is making sure that Zmok does not end up going down. Mythic Dungeon, they're making their way towards a very similar point. Shakib ended up getting hit by a mine there and almost ended up going down, but it's going to be okay from them as he was able to actually grapple back onto that train track area.
Yeah, this rogue things.
I wish I had.
I wish so as well. Now, Aura is still working on Rixa, and as you said, that debuff here, the chemical burn, just being applied. Now, Proud Warriors can reflect every second, and then of course we also have the rogues. You can completely immune them with cloaks, so all you want to do is rotate your defensives basically, and of course it's also dispellable. Now the only reason why you want to have the spell reflect and the immunes is because Smok cannot dispel them both at the very same time, as it has to have a cooldown. So you want to rotate your cooldowns. You want to have spell reflect every second, at least one, and Smok dispelling the other one, and then whenever Divine does not have spell reflect up, you want to use one of the cloaks.
Yeah, and Method NA here doing a very interesting pull with the War Machine and the Technician with Rixa Flux Flame. Of course, these mobs are pretty unconventionally not pulled, so it's very interesting to see Method NA just looking to grab them. I think it just ends up coming to proximity. We actually saw them do this yesterday as well, so being able to do that with Rixa makes for the most efficient pull that you could possibly imagine, whereas Abrakeydabra has already gotten all of their trash count for them. They are looking to Shroud all the way through the instance, and basically for Abrakeydabra, the only way that they end up actually losing this is if Zmok ends up actually going down, and the reason for that being is because Druid is the only class that Abrakeydabra has available to them that can actually battle res teams. Of course, the Engineering battle res not available on Tournament Realms, unfortunately enough, so Zmok needs to really make sure that he ends up living.
I mean, we've seen Resto Druids die and them still finishing the boss off with the 3 rogues. So, I mean, in the end, even if Smok dies, there's still a way they can finish it off. The rogues have many utilities available to them, a lot of self-healing, a lot of defensives, so they might be able to survive, but this boss does do a lot of tank damage as well. And if Smok is dead, then this missile that we've just seen go on Smok will go on a rogue. Or an attack. So once it spawns, all the rogues will have to go out of melee range and cut it around. So that will definitely hurt them a lot. But again, at this point, Method NA is still working on Rixa, and you gotta say, they didn't make a lot of mistakes. If you look at their death timer, they did have 3 deaths, but they didn't have any full team wipes. It really just came down to the strategy before the first boss. The trash area where Method NA seemed like they're doing those insane flashy pulls. It's like, oh my god, they pull like 7 thugs, and they pull 5 peacekeepers. But in the end...
7 thugs, oh no, man.
But in the end, Abrakeydabra just being a lot faster and way more efficient at the start. I'm not sure exactly why that was. Maybe, as we talked about earlier, just this whole setup time that he needed for Method NA, doing those flashy pulls just costing him too much time.
I think it was like the setup, the chain pulling from the side of Abrakeydabra, plus the fact that Method NA did have like just peppering in just a couple deaths. I wonder if Abrakeydabra is actually going to tank Mogul Razdunk on that safe spot the whole entire time. For those of you who don't know, there are a few spots on Mogul Razdunk where the Boombas actually don't end up spawning that ground effect. One of them is next to the grates, similar to where they were actually tanking him earlier, and there's like another one off to the far side. It's kind of hard for me to be able to like show you without like any tools, but there are basically a few safe spots on Mogul Razdunk where you don't end up actually getting hit by those Boombas. So I wonder if Abrakeydabra is actually not going to move the boss off of that safe spot. Of course, that is actually very good for melee, and you actually do see Abrakeydabra there finishing that intermission, and now they just have the quick burn on Mogul Razdunk. Once he does end up hitting 0%, there will be like a little goblin that ends up spawning out of the little head, and then once that little mob is killed, it doesn't have too much health, then the fight will actually end. Method NA is finally in the intermission on Mogul Razdunk, but it just does seem a little bit too little too late for them, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Method NA. I feel like they always have a good showing, but they just always slightly too slow against their opponents, because their opponents always seem to have the best showing against them. It always seems like whenever they play against Method NA, then the teams all of a sudden have those perfect runs. Very unfortunate for Method NA. Abrakeydabra, again, they were struggling before, but against Method NA, just having these clean games and 2-0ing Method NA here.
No tricks, no sleight of hand. Abrakeydabra having the magic trick of their lives as a 2-0 sweep Method NA out of it. And for the first time in our cup play, they are going to the grand finals for it. They're having such an impressive performance, not only today, but yesterday as well, and in the time trials, ironic.
The curse is gone. We didn't see Mr. Walker. We only saw Dr. Well, I don't
we only saw Dr. Jekyll.
I don't remember which one's good, which one's bad. It's been a while since I've seen it. But
come on.
The whole story of this is Abrakeydabra had more aggressive pulls than Method NA, and they were able to pull them off cleanly. And Method NA just wasn't clean. They had 2 real spot deaths in Yoda and Lighty early on. They weren't just committing to their pulls as much. I even went back and checked just to make sure, and I looked at this first pull, and there were 4 peacekeepers for Abra and only 3 for Method NA. Usually NA does a bigger pull there, so I'm kind of curious what the problem was. Also, Abra committed to things like pulling the peacekeeper on top of the first boss as well. And just in general, they were just smashing this dungeon. I went back and checked times for this dungeon previously in the tournament. Pain for Fim had a 20-30 in here. They were at like 18 flat. These guys absolutely smoked this dungeon.
They definitely did, and it goes to show you, when they're on their game, when all of the pieces are kind of put together and they're all flowing correctly, Abrakeydabra is a team to watch out for, as they did secure that victory. So incredibly impressive by them, as we're seeing our grand final, our full bracket getting made up here with Method EU waiting for their opponents now. They're getting themselves ready to go out against Abrakeydabra. So no surprise to see Method EU, and as far as I can remember, they still have not lost a match in cup play yet, from season 1 to season 2 right now. So Abrakeydabra is wanting to be able to put it on to that offset, or want to pull up that upset. Tettles keeps smiling at me. Tettles is like the biggest grin as I'm talking. He's like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
drive me crazy.